Hello, nerds, and welcome back to part 4 and our final episode of FanExpo Canada 2013 coverage. Now, we just want to remind you that the Canadian Nerd Show is brought to you by our amazing friends over at HanSoloRecords.com, your Canadian source for the best in both nerdcore and underground hip-hop, SuperPowerCollectibles.com, your Canadian online source for comics, collectibles, and more, as well as Harry Tarantula, or HarryT.com, your downtown Toronto source for games, comics, and more. So what's on the docket for today? Well, that one's simple. It's the DC Breaking Into Comics panel. And in case you are looking to break into comics, this is definitely a great way and great place to start. So, without further ado, the panel.
Waiting, I will apologize to all of you on behalf of FanExpo Canada for the shoddy way they run panel rooms. We were actually the panel before this one, and they asked us to end 10 minutes early to accommodate the next panel, and then they let the next panel run 30 minutes late. That's a unique scenario we don't see a lot of shows. And speaking of unique scenarios, this is a fairly new panel for us that we've been doing at shows this summer called My Secret Origin or How I Broke Into Comics. My name is John Cunningham. I work for DC Entertainment, and we have a chunk of the contingent from DC that's here working this show. So I'm going to let them go down the aisle and tell you who they are and what they do, and then we'll get into figuring out why we're all here.
I'm Brian Cunningham. I'm co-founder of the Just Sleep group of books at DC Comics.
Hi, I'm Ray Fox. I'm the writer of Constantine and Trinity of Sin Pandora, as well as September's Riddler villain one-shot. And I'm also an artist. I drew a story that Jeff Lemire wrote for the American Vampire Anthology coming out this week.
My name is Jason Fadlock. I am the artist on Detective Comics right now, and I've also done covers and all kinds of other fun stuff for DC as well.
I'm Lee Bermejo. I've done Batman, Superman, the Joker, Rorschach, and right now I'm doing a Vertigo book. Oh, yeah, that's important, right? It's called The Suiciders.
Hi, Eddie Berganza, senior editor at DC Comics. I'm the one that's doing the Jail Canada, so yay. And also doing the Superman line, which is Superman Action Comics, Superboy, Supergirl, and also Red Hood.
Yeah, Red Hood.
Yeah, thank you.
So obviously the easiest way to go through the panel is have people talk about how they got their break, but I think that all of us who work in comics in whatever form that we work at it in, before we figured out how to get into comics, we had to become comics freaks. If anyone on the panel is not a comics freak, who does not believe that label holds up for them, raise your hand. Didn't think so. So I guess the first question I would ask of everybody is, before we figure out how you got into trying to make a living out of it, is, do you remember when, where, and what comic book was the first one that sort of rocked your world or got you into it? I'll give you a good example. It's one of those things I didn't figure out till later in life. Growing up in the mid-'60s, I had an uncle who was a comic book collector, and back then, I guess that meant he threw everything he bought into boxes. There were no plastic bags, there was no preservation, and then he had a 7-year-old nephew, me, who would come over and raid those boxes. And I remember vividly looking through those things. I had the ability to read them over and over again. Fantastic Four, 49 and 50, appearance of Galactus, who rocked my world. Jack Kirby showed me there's something wacky going on, even as a little kid. And I remember that. I remember looking at those two issues so distinctly in my mind. And that was sort of my stepping stone. So let's start with Eddie. When was your world rocked, Eddie?
Okay. I'm Guatemalan in descent, so it goes all the way back to Guatemala. My aunt would take me to stores, and the thing that just caught my eye was La Linterna Verde, which is Green Lantern. And there was just this trippy thing where Hal was falling into the lantern in this weird world by this giant head guy who wasn't one of Hector Hammond, but another of his big-headed villains. And it was just cool to see it. That instantly caught my eye, and then like just my funny later on I became one of the editors on the Green Lantern books.
For me, it was, I think it's pretty cliche, but it was The Dark Knight Returns. As a little kid, was always reading Batman and Superman books, primarily, some other stuff too, Spider-Man here and there. But I think it was my 11th birthday, my grandmother bought me this book, which was The Dark Knight Returns, and it was the first trade I ever owned, and it was the first time I really noticed artwork, because before, I mean, you know, I was reading comics and enjoying the stories and the characters, but I didn't really care who wrote or drew them. And maybe it was a combination of the age and the fact that I was starting to realize that you know, art was something I wanted to pursue in my life. And that, you know, I saw that book and it was beautiful artwork, amazing story, but also what Lynn Barley did with the colors, I'd never seen anything like that before. And so it really, I mean, I read that book until it was, pages were coming out of it and dog-eared. Yeah.
For me, I had gotten into comics a little bit later. When I was in high school. My English teacher used to come. He caught me drawing one day, and I sketching in class when I should have been reading something. And he said, "Hey, you should be a comic artist." And so he started bringing me in these comics. And so I was kind of reading different things like that, and X-Men, Ultimate X-Men, things like that. But the book that really changed it for me was Jim Lee's Hush. When I picked up the trade of that and started reading through that, I realized at that moment that I wanted to pursue that kind of art. Just this big, epic, bold artwork, and nothing to me, like nothing else on the shelf seemed to resonate to me like Jim Lee's artwork. And so, you know, he became really my first real like drawing inspiration. And to this day, I mean, as I'm sitting and drawing Batman, Hush is right there. And same with like what Lee said, like my version of Hush is like falling apart, torn to shreds, just because I'm constantly looking at it for inspiration and how he tackles this kind of panel and things like that. And one day I'll have to actually buy another version of it, but I still really cherish that first one. So.
I've read comics since I can remember. I remember I used to go to the library with my parents, and in the kids section, we would just have all the superhero comics kind of on a shelf to read, and I would sit there reading them while my parents would find books. And I used to buy comics for myself with my allowance. I would waste all my money on them, as my mom said. The first comic I was just talking about this with Brian the other day. The first comic I remember buying at the store, going specifically to buy and coming home with, was Batman 400. And a great story that had like something like 8 or 9 different artists: Brian Ball and Gilson Cabbage, Steve Leo, all these kind of guys. And then I'd say the first book that completely blew my mind and made me want to work in comics. I was a literary nerd too when I was a kid. I read a lot. And when I read Alan Moore's American Gothic saga in Swamp Thing, it was like dark poetry in comics. I couldn't believe it even existed. And it's actually, I bought those off the newsstand and quickly ended up preserving them. Those are all bagged on a shelf. And then I bought the trade collections of them, and those are ripped to hell, and I keep replacing them.
I got into comics, I guess it's kind of this is also kind of a cliche, but when I was a kid, my local TV station ran reruns of the 1960s Batman TV show. And I was enthralled, completely enthralled. I loved anything to do with Batman. And somehow an older cousin of mine gave me a book called The Great Comic Book Superheroes, or The Great Comic Book Heroes by Jules Pfeiffer. And it reprints all these old Golden Age comics, and one of the reprints was Batman #1. And it had a Joker story in it. And I don't know if you've ever had the chance to read the original Batman #1, but the Joker in that story is vastly different from the Cesar Romero version of the Joker in that TV show. The character was no joke, and I was just taken aback by, who is this guy? This isn't Cesar Romero trying to hide his mustache with white face paint. Like, it just didn't make sense.
That's so much more disturbing.
I know. I guess my 4-year-old mind didn't really pick up on that, but one thing led to that book, and then an issue of Marvel Tales. My actual physical first comic book was an issue of Marvel Tales, which reprints, at the time, it reprint old Amazing Spider-Man issues. And from that point on, I was completely hooked, because it was an issue with the Prowler. I don't know if you're familiar with the villain, Spider-Man villain, the Prowler. He's not a bad guy, but he's a thief. And Spider-Man fights this guy, and Prowler is about to fall off the ledge of a building and die. And Spider-Man has been spent the entire issue beating him up, decides to save him, and that really resonated with me. I thought this is a cool character. And Spider-Man was also on the Electric Company, which I don't know if it aired here, but so I was somewhat familiar with Spider-Man, but that kind of delineated what heroism was about to me, and I don't know, I just never looked back.
Brian, you're really aging us talking about the Electric.
Sorry, man. Sorry. I love the Electric Company.
So now everybody has the bug in them, and there's tons and tons of people who can tell the same story. But then everybody up here has a sort of different angle the story takes, because that passion somehow then translates into pursuing this as a career. So in order to not keep going in the same order, I'm going to go back to Ray, and we'll come back and fill in Brian in a minute, because I was put him on the spot twice. Is it easy to book? Is there a moment where you remember thinking, this is how I have to make a living? Is there a key moment that sort of made you realize that this is something you could do as opposed to something you just enjoy?
Yeah, actually there is. So I mean, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be an artist. I loved comics. I thought that I might try to make comics, and then I don't know if how many people here live in Toronto and saw this in the 80s, but in the 80s in Toronto, there used to be a DIY festival. It was kind of a punk zine thing, and it was just like they would do it anywhere they could, like in a church or in the art gallery of Ontario or whatever. They would just rent out a little room, and there would just be all these tables full of people who had made their own sort of photocopied magazines and would sell them for 50 cents or $1 or give them away just for the pleasure of having somebody read them. And like their star was this notoriously nutty guy named Craig Killoden, who wrote these insane little pamphlets, these like fiction stories, and would sell them at these shows for $1 each. And people would like flock to get his crazy stories, because he would only make like 20 copies, because he didn't think anyone wanted them. Anyway, though, it was there that it was like I remember talking to some of these people who made these zines, and they told me what I guess I'm going to say to you, which is if you want to make comics, if you want to write stories for people to read, it's one thing to say I want to make comics for DC Comics, and you can go down a road to get there, but if what you want to do is make comics, all you need is access to a photocopier. And you can be a comic writer tomorrow. That's how I got my start. I started making those photocopied zines. I just made a mini this year, and I have it here at the show. It's just sort of like I still enjoy doing it. These zines are 8.5 by 11 paper that you fold in half and you can staple yourself. And if you have a story to tell, you can tell it. And the thing about it is, if you can do that, and if you have the guts to put a story down on paper and try to sell it to people, you will learn what people do and don't want to read, what's interesting to them, what's worthwhile to them, and you can sort of streamline yourself, and you can get skilled, and you can learn things like how to end a story, not just come up with an idea. You can learn how to deliver that story in text and in art. The best way to learn is by doing it, and then I honestly believe that's also the best way to end up working for one of these big companies, is because I spent maybe 5 or 6 years selling nothing but these things before some smaller indie companies picked me up, and eventually I got my chance to work for DC. And I don't think I would have nearly the amount of craft or honestly the guts to tell some of the stories I do if I hadn't spent that time desperately trying to get people to buy my $1 book.
Yeah, for me, I grew up in a small town in southern Ontario called Harrow, and it's a small little farming town, and you know, not being from the city of Windsor, which is about 30 minutes away, and you're always kind of told in high school and whatnot that because you don't have the programs and things like that the big city schools have, like you have less of a chance maybe getting into the arts and things like that. Well, like I mentioned before, my high school teacher had caught me doodling when I should have been reading Shakespeare or something, and kind of got me into comics. And I decided I didn't really know which way to go, and so I went and I took an animation course at St. Clair College in Windsor, and hoping that maybe some of that stuff would eventually help me create an art portfolio to eventually get into comics. And the breakthrough moment for me was one of our teachers, who was actually my English teacher that I was taking like as an extra credit, somehow knew David Finch, and David Finch was from Windsor, and that was mind-blowing. Here's this guy who, at the time, he was working for Marvel. He was on Avengers, I think. Here's this guy who takes some time out of his day to come and talk to a bunch of us young artists, you know. And I had read his Ultimate X-Men stuff. I knew who he was, and as I was sitting there, he was speaking, and he was sort of talking about his career. That was the moment in my head I realized, man, maybe I could do something like that as well. Maybe it doesn't matter if I'm from a small town or I don't have all the things that maybe some of the kids who got in big schools got. Maybe if I just really worked hard and pushed myself and dedicated myself to a craft, maybe one day I could be in that seat talking to students about my career. And looking back now, it would be about 3 or 4 years later, I sent my portfolio to Dave just to get a couple pointers. And he invited me over to his house, and then that turned into a 6-month going over to his house every other day comic book boot camp, where he literally showed me how to draw everything from the ground up, kind of helping me to hone my skills until the day that he eventually had joined DC, and I believe he sent my work into Eddie. And I have a lot to thank Eddie for, because he gave me my first chance on Superman and Batman issue 71 as a fill-in. And I was just so thankful, and I was sick to my stomach for a week, having to try and figure out how I was going to actually complete the work. But you know, that meeting Dave and seeing him at that college, was like, I think the moment where it clicked on in my head, I can do this. And I just worked really, really, really hard, and spent a lot of years to get there. But yeah.
I was going to add to what you were saying. I mean, the thing is, like, everybody says, oh, I want to get in. But then when they finally get the chance, this is where the make or break happens. Is like, what you just said there is like, you worked really hard. You made all the crazy deadlines I gave you. And it was tough, because we had no time. That's why I brought you in. It's like, we had to get this done.
I was throwing up. I was so sick from stress. My mom's here, and she can remember. I was just throwing up.
Sorry.
I was so sick. And my wife, who at the time was my girlfriend or fiance, came down to visit, and I was trying to get those deadlines done, and it was, but I worked very hard, and I'm so thankful for those opportunities.
Moms are awesome. I think the first time I realized that I wanted to do comics as a profession, I guess maybe it was a year or so after I got in The Dark Knight Returns, and I discovered comic book stores. And at that point in time, I wanted to read anything that DC was putting out that had a suggested for mature readers label on the cover. And that led me to a book called American Flag. And I just really loved Chaykin. I loved his work on Black Hawk, and so started reading American Flag and started copying covers of American Flag. And did one for a school competition, and I chose, I think it was the issue 1 cover of the first comics run, and it's him kind of sitting one leg up on an armchair with a bunch of half-naked girls, basically in lingerie, sitting all around him, and TVs in the background with pictures of his face. And I took a couple days to copy this cover and submitted it. And at a certain point, I got invited to the principal's office, and they were very nice about it. It wasn't like they threatened to suspend me or anything, but they asked me kindly if I'd like to reconsider the image that I submitted. So that was, I think, the first moment where I went, wow, okay, so, you know, this is fun. And after that, I started doing, you know, the same thing. I started doing my own mini comics. I started to, about 14, 15 years old, I would do submissions to take with me to San Diego Con. I was fortunate growing up close enough to San Diego. That's a gigantic convention, and so I could go there every year and take, I started at 15 or so to take submissions around to conventions. At the same time, I was doing my own mini comics just because it was, it had become this need. It had become this thing that I had to do. And, you know, and I was experimenting with styles a lot at the time too, so every artist that I became interested in, I would try to imitate in some way or another. As soon as I started reading Stray Bullets, I thought, oh, you know, I should try to do things in this style and tell stories about, you know, people getting their heads blown off, and you know, it was a time of kind of a very naive experimentation for me, and yeah, I started bringing this portfolio with me to San Diego Con, and trying to put pages in front of anybody, really anybody who would look at them. And most people at the time were, you know, rightfully so, giving me some hard criticisms. I wasn't very good. And some people just flat out told me, you know, you're 15, you know, we're not going to give you a job. And I was like, my mom says I'm really good. I don't understand why no one wants to hire me. You know, but you know, I kept going, and it took about 4 years of solid conventioning, and you know, mini comics in the meantime, sample pages, and yeah.
All right, so as you know, everybody wants to be a comic book writer, comic book artist. There's really no kid, I don't think, anywhere that's going, I really want to be a comic book editor. That's what I want to do. So not in my plans at all. And I also thought, those guys are really talented. I don't have a shot at that. I'm going to do something easy. I'm going to go make movies. So edits were doing that, and wound up having an internship at a movie magazine called Starlog. And from that internship, I made friends who then went on to be at DC. And when they saw us, you know, a year went by and I'm still not making movies, they said, hey, you want to come and join the DC staff? And it was that kind of just turn of one just getting in, which was great, and making friends. So for one, I'm a big believer in any kind of internship that you can get, by all means, get it. By all, that also means don't flood us with internships as far as DC, because right now we're not doing that, which is a shame, because honestly, it is a great way just to see the process in any job, because you may think you love something, but until you start doing it and interacting with everyone, you get a really good sense of what it is that you like and don't like.
Brian? I guess I go back to, I mean, and this is going to date me, but I go back to the year 1986. For me, it was a very formative year. I was 15 years old. Well, actually, let me ask the people in the crowd. I mean, how many people here were born after the year 1986? You raise your hand. Wow. Well, just to give you some context of what the world was like in comics in 1986.
You guys were born after Star Wars.
1986, you know, a convention like this, I think you might find in two places in North America, one in San Diego and one in Chicago, and otherwise it was very local. You know, a small hotel or something like that. It was very much a local, small-time thing. And at the time, I kind of feel Marvel and DC were really competing. I mean, they were really going head-to-head with high-quality material at the time. And that whole year's worth of content, I could just rattle off so many things that came out that year that resonate still. People still read this stuff today. Movies are being based off of some of this stuff today. I mean, I'm trying to rattle off. I mean, Dark Knight Returns came out that year. Watchmen came out that year. Daredevil Born Again ended in that year. Howard Chaykin's Shadow came out that year. I mean, there's so many things and risks and bold moves that both publishers are making. Marvel, Mutant Massacre was the first Marvel X-Men crossover that came out that year. That was a novel thing back then, believe it or not. But it was a huge year for comics, and it seems like every month something was coming out that was just exciting, and I was so into that. And right then and there, I knew I wanted to be a part of this in some way, shape, or form. And like Eddie said, no one actually gets into the business saying, I want to be a comic book editor. I actually wanted to be a comic book artist. But, you know, I was only 15. There was no way I was going to get a job anytime soon. I had no concept of how to even break into the business. There really wasn't any mechanism like there is today. There were no books on the bookshelves that tells you, break into comics this way. No, it didn't exist. There was no internet. There was nothing. You had no way to get in. You could write a letter to the editor. Maybe it would be read. Maybe.
What's a letter?
Well, oh, yeah. These things where you actually took a pen and a paper, you actually wrote it on paper. They're called letters, and you put the stamp on an envelope and you mailed it through the postal service. And that was your only communication with the business, really, unless you met somebody at a convention, which was unlikely because they were in parts of the country that I would never ever travel to, could never afford to travel to. So anyway, long story short, it was an inspiring year, and everything that I read that year seemingly inspired me to want to be more of a part of it. And you know, I don't know, I try to dabble in artwork and whatnot. That led to other things, and I don't know, some odd years later, here I am.
I didn't think this was going to be such a gruesome troll through how old I am. Good Lord. I'm not prepared for that today. All right, so everyone, we're going to rewind for a second and play catch-up because we've been joined up here on the stage from The Flash. It's Mr. Francis Manipul. All right, question one, Francis. Do you remember specifically what you read when you became a comic freak?
Well, actually, my dad used to buy me Superman comic books when I was a kid in the Philippines, so that I learned how to speak English. But after that, I just fell out of it. And I'm like, oh, speak English, good to go, right? So I think one day my mom was just at a normal bookstore, and I was just bored out of my mind, and there was this spinner rack by the cash register, and I saw this X-Men comic book that had Captain America, Black Widow, and Wolverine on the cover. And you know, I picked it up and I'm like, that's kind of cool. And it's got Captain America, kind of like Superman, you know, same colors. So I picked it up, and this guy named Jim Lee drew it, and I was like, you know, holy shit. You know, at this point, you know, a lot of the comic books back then weren't as detailed. It wasn't as in your face, you know, and it was one of those things where I had like this big revelation where I'm like, what have I been missing out on, you know? So from there, I became like a big comic book fan, specifically for the art. And I think at that time, it was a very exciting time for young artists to discover comic books, because around that exact same time, these renegade artists were breaking free of, you know, Marvel and DC at the time to form this thing called Image Comic Books. And it was one of those things where I was like, I didn't realize that artists at that point in time had that capacity to do those kind of things. And it was just such an exciting time to be a fan. And one of the other things that also really drew me in, I don't know, again, it seems like a lot of people are fairly young, but there was this TV show. Do you guys know the channel TVO? Yeah. Do you guys remember the show called Prisoners of Gravity? That was pretty awesome, right? And then there was another show called like Anti-Gravity Room on YTV, which was also cool. But what was great about the Prisoners of Gravity show is that it had such in-depth interviews with Frank Miller and Will Eisner and all of these great artists that it went from, when I was looking at the image stuff, I think everybody can agree that the stuff looked great and it was exciting, but it was very much a surface kind of, there wasn't a lot of depth into it. And then when I, listened and watched interviews from these legends, I couldn't believe how the medium was, it suddenly felt limitless. It went from this thing that it felt like, okay, you do this, and then you listen to those guys. It suddenly became, this is a really, really intricate, tapestry of an art form, and it just really, really enticed me to really try to get better as an artist and as a storyteller. And I think it was really weird because I went backwards. I went from looking at all of these new guys, and then I started digging into like, oh, well, who did Jim like? Oh, he likes Barry Windsor Smith. Who did Barry Windsor Smith like? I just kept going backwards, and then I think I started looking at Hal Foster's stuff. So it was really strange journey to go from, seeing these, I guess, what you would call more of a pop type of art to suddenly more of an in-depth kind of thing. But that's the thing that's exciting about the industry is that you can go from something that's very mainstream to something that's extremely personal with what a lot of those guys were doing. And to me, that was really exciting.
So then how does that moment become, I can make a living at that? Is there something that happened that made you go, this is what I want to do?
Oh, well, that part was different. At the time, there was also this magazine called Wizard, and I really enjoyed a lot of those, all those photos they were having. They looked like they were having a lot of fun. These guys look pretty rich, Yeah, I'm like, God damn, you got Mark Sylvester there with a Viper, and these guys hang out at Playboy Mansions. I'm like, that sounds pretty good. So, at this point in time, I was like around roughly 15 or something, and I was like, I kind of like art, and surprise, money is pretty exciting too, So around the time when I was 16, I started developing my portfolio, and that was actually when the industry crashed, like really badly, and it went from this industry that seemed like they were printing money to an industry that, you'd be lucky to get printed, and it was probably going to be for free. But at that time, I met a lot of like-minded artists that we were all trying to do the same thing, and we realized, the thing that we loved most about the industry is just the art form itself, and money didn't seem to matter at that point anymore. And so we just made a go at it, and that's pretty much the story.
Okay, so you became comic freaks. You had a moment where you went, this would be really cool to do for a living. And on that level, I think as a lot of people think about their careers or how things work, that's kind of a dream moment. And not to bring everybody's head down, but I guess the next question I'd ask is, so now you're living this dream life, what's the nightmare side of it? What makes it, it's your passion for what you do is what drives you to do it. What specifically are one of the things that make it difficult to keep that going? And I'll start with Eddie, and you probably, as a reminder, don't want to name names of people you currently work with.
I was going to say he's not here, and that'll get back to him, so I didn't say that. like anything, it's a job, so you're dealing, and I think this is, everybody's going to say this, it's deadlines. We all want to create, and we all want to make it perfect, and keep working at it, and keep working at it, and it's someone, and it becomes my job to go, no, you need to let go of it now. Let's move it down the line, and that's the thing. But it's also on our end, too, when we get stuff. There's that thing where you have all the pieces together, and you do want to move it, you want to call back, maybe do this different, maybe do that. But it just, there isn't the time for this kind of thing. And I think that becomes kind of just horrific.
For me, it's a little bit different. I mean, yeah, the deadlines are rough sometimes, but for me, I guess I have to explain something else before I can really get to it, which is when I broke in, I actually broke in at Jim Lee's studio in San Diego called Wildstorm. This was before they sold it to DC. And it was, like Francis mentioned, I got hired in '97, and that was when the industry crashed, and people were kind of, it was almost like there was this feeling like it was the Titanic, and a lot of guys who were working at the studio at the time were on little boats rowing away, going like, come on, come work in video games, man, there's no money, get out while you can. And I was like, dude, I just got here. I really want to draw comics. You know, that's my dream. So the handful of guys that remained at the studio, we kind of became this tightly knit group. We all were around the same age, and you know, the beautiful thing about starting there, and also the nightmare of starting there, was the fact that you also had Jim and Travis Ray and Jeff Campbell, and a lot of guys who were already established, and I was incredibly intimidated because I loved their work, and you know, you saw these guys working there, and it became this pressure cooker, and that's something, oddly enough, that hasn't really gone away to this day, where, you know, you see there's a lot of really talented people who work in this business, really talented, and you know, every day, specifically at the beginning, especially at the beginning, coming to work there was very daunting because, you know, it almost got to a point where you didn't want to draw in front of other people because we would just make fun of each other viciously. I mean, it was a vicious thing, you know, and it got to the point where I think we all developed different kinds of complexes because of it. Because, you know, there'd be, I would work at night, and JJ Kirby and some of the other guys there at the time would work a little bit at night, a little bit during the day, and so I would take off and go sleep, come back to work, and if there was an unfinished page on my desk, maybe there would be a face that had been erased, replaced with a little smiley face saying, try again, and you know, it was this very kind of like, oh my God, and it wasn't even infuriating that they had done that. It was literally the embarrassment of knowing you'd done something awful, that they were like laughing at you, you know, that you weren't there, and they were like, did you see this shit this guy was doing? It's terrible. And I know because I was in on these conversations when other guys weren't there, and when they were there, where we would just say like, oh dude, this is awful, man, you really have to, and we would literally, oh, this is horrible. We would sit in circles, and I'm going to embarrass a bunch of people now. We would sit in circles and critique. The idea was that we would critique each other, but it got really horrendous. It got personal at times, you know what I mean? But it became this, like I said, it became this pressure cooker where you felt like you had to perform at a very high level all the time, because the slightest little weakness in what you drew was going to be made fun of, you know, or just used as a point for mockery for years to come. I mean, there's still elements of that. And I find that even now, I have that, you know, before, when you finish a page, you turn it in and you think, oh my God, like, people are going to see this printed. It's just going to be, you know, they're all going to laugh at me. It's very much that's rough for me.
Yeah, I can share with both of those things. The deadlines, working, your weekends and your holidays and trying to get that deadline done. And that can be tough, especially on your family when, you and your wife want to maybe go away for a weekend. You can't really do that in this business. And then what Lee was saying too, I figure every single month I hand in a book, I'm going to get fired. Like I just figure, I handed in this book, that's my last one. These guys are going to look at it and they're going to say, this guy sucks, let's get rid of him. That's like a fear that's constantly in my head all the time. And even I shouldn't do it, but I go and sometimes I'll check out different reviews. But
Don't do that.
Thankfully, a lot of them seem to really like my art, so it gives me some confidence. But those are two things, and again, thirdly, I'd say it's hard to balance things. It's hard to balance. Like you've got to have free time. You've got to spend time with your family. Like my wife and I, we don't have kids yet, but like I'm scared. One of my greatest fears is I'm going to neglect my kids because I'm going to choose my career over my kids, and that's something that I really don't want to do. And and so you want to work steady. You want to do 20 issues in a row and have that epic run. But then there's that time where you have to say, you know what, I may need to take a fill-in for this issue so that my wife and I can go away for the weekend and enjoy ourselves. And those are things that you don't see as a reader. You don't see the struggles that the artists go through, and I'm sure the writers as well, that we go through struggles. We have our own personal lives. If there's a reason why we may have like 3 or 4 fill-ins before we get back on a book. It's because maybe something happened in your personal life, and it's hard to get back into things. And so those things are tough to deal with, but it's learning to balance those things that to me is one of the tougher things. But so far, having my wife is my greatest support, and having her there and being able to figure out schedules and things like that, it's just been excellent. So.
All right, I guess I'll give a writer's perspective on this, a writer's nightmare. I don't know about you guys, but before I was actually a writer and I was just talking about being a writer, the picture I had in my head was like, a writer sits on his veranda with his cup full of whiskey and his speech recognition software and just sits there spooling out genius. Right? Like it just flows, and he works for about an hour a week, and that'll do the trick. The truth of it is, just about every night after working a full day, I'm up at about 2 in the morning agonizing over whether I had a character say the right thing the right way on panel 4 on page 16 of, an issue of Constantine or something, and I kill myself over it, and I go back over it again and again to try and get it right, and then the issue comes out, and the majority of the readers, they'll have their opinion whether they like the issue or not, but the fact of it is they'll read that panel, they'll read that page, it'll take them a couple seconds to read it, and it won't even register. They won't be like, that was genius. They'll just be like, yeah, I guess it made sense. So, you realize that you're striving for something that's the best it can be, and you hope it is the best, and you hope that it affects people, and maybe it blows their mind, or maybe they have an emotional reaction to it, or at the very least they say it made sense and it was good. But you are putting all of this of yourself into this and then showing it to people, and a hell of a lot of people who see it are going to react to it like this. And then go to the next thing, right? You have to be willing to accept that that's going to happen, because every once in a while one of those people is going to go, oh man, that was fantastic.
My nightmare scenario is probably doing these panels. I feel like I'm just spouting utter gibberish. No value whatsoever. That and working with Eddie. I don't know. I mean, deadlines. Yeah, deadlines. They're constant. That you're never gonna get past deadlines. When you're done with one crucial deadline, a couple weeks back, we had a killer week putting to bed both Justice League 23, which is 32 pages, and Forever Evil #1, which is close to 32 pages. Yeah, 32 pages. Oh man, that was a killer week. And then, you know, once you get the satisfaction of getting all that stuff out into the printer, get it to the printer, it's like, oh man, okay, we got this coming up next week. We got 4 books going out. It never ends. Another nightmare scenario is just trying to get talent not to look at the internet at all. It tends to be more negative than positive. So I don't know, you know, you're fortunate that you actually get some positive feedback here. So that's
Right now,
Where do you go looking for the positive stuff?
Tina Fey actually said if you're in any kind of entertainment and you feel too good about yourself, all you need to do is get on the internet for about half an hour and that'll solve your problem.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, I chide guys sometimes. They're like, yeah, but such and such said this. Oh no, I'm like, just stop. Just don't do it. Don't go on the internet. Don't do it. All it's doing is stopping you from working. You know, and speaking to a little bit of what Ray's saying, you know, being an editor, part of it is having to have an opinion. And it's tough because you know guys who do the work and it might not be 100% the best it can be. Part of the job is being able to give, you know, feedback that can help it be the best it can be, at least from one person's perspective. But it's tough. It's tough because you know guys work really hard on the things that they do, and you know you know people say you know it's not personal, it's business. This is my job. It's part of who they are and how they express themselves on the page, whether it be a script or a piece of art. You know, artists. I think artists in particular live with, outside of the editor of a particular book, an artist lives with the work the longest. You know, the editor will see it all the way through, for every stage from, you know, pre-script all the way to getting it out to the printer. The artist spends at least a full, you know, unless someone's really fast, I mean, you know, at least 4 to 5 weeks on a book. So when you actually have to be an editor and say, you know, this panel is a little, you know, not so great. You feel bad because you know that they put a lot of effort and time into it. And there was a perspective from their point of view of why they did the things they did. And, you know, but you got to do your job as an editor and say, well, this pose isn't as dynamic as it could be. You know, or, you know, this face, the eyes are cross-eyed. It's not good. You know, so, I mean, things like that. I mean, it's tough. It's tough, but, you know, believe me, I mean, working in comics is fantastic. Highly recommend it if you have aspirations. There's no better business in the world that I know of, where you can actually put something on paper and have it printed within the span of, I don't know, 2 months. You know, I mean,
I can't say that I've worked writing in a few different media. I've written some prose, I've written for games, and done a little bit of what ended up being unproduced film. But comics is the medium where I have enjoyed the most creative freedom and the fastest, as you say, the fastest to completion, the fastest where you can put it out in front of the public and see what they think.
I think my gibberish is done on this one.
Enough of the gibberish comment. If you were speaking gibberish, I'm jumping. Francis, what is your nightmare?
Put my hands on everything. So I remember there was just like one day where there were these slew of emails, oh, what are you going to do with this, what are you going to do with that? So I'm like, you know what? I'm like not going to reply to this email and see if this issue resolves itself. And it kind of did. No, it did. You know what? I was like, you know, Brian's he's a great co-writer, and you know, also Brian's a great editor. So I thought, you know, this will work itself out. And sure enough, it did. Like by the time 5 o'clock rolled in, I was like, oh, look at that. It fixed itself. But there was one thing. There was only one thing, though. There was one thing that slipped through the cracks. But I decided, you know what, I have to let that go because in the overall spectrum of the thing, it wasn't a big deal. And all it was just like a miscolored costume. But I said, you know what, that is not a big deal. So I figured, I'm kind of OCD, so I realized if I'm able to let that go, I'll be able to let go of other things, therefore allowing the book to move along a lot quicker in a much more fluid manner. You know, so yeah, right.
So we can just let go of those emails then?
Yeah.
Oh, well,
We cannot respond to someone?
we can try it out, see how it works.
I just like the idea that these things will just resolve themselves. I'm gonna try that.
That's what editors are for. Okay, so here we are at a comic book convention and we're on this panel, but I know that as part of being at shows and going out and talking to people, all of us, whether it's a simp like me in marketing or my editorial friends, or especially these guys as writers and artists, you have people who come up and they ask you that question that is essentially the framework for this. How do I break in? What should I do? I'm guessing that most of you have an answer that you've sort of crafted. And by that I mean I spent many years in book publishing, and I always, it seemed like every time I flew in and out of Toronto and the US Customs people would stop me. What are you doing in Toronto? I'm here for a sales conference. Where do you work book publishing? About 1 out of every 3 of them would pause for a moment and look at me and go, how do I get a book published? And you come to realize when you're in the terror and panic of standing in the customs line, just trying to hope that they let you back into your country, you're not thinking very quickly on your feet. And so the answer, I developed a stock answer, and the stock answer was, who's your favorite writer? Grab one of their books, look at the dedication. They'll usually thank their agent. You have to have an agent to get published. If that agent has affinity for something like what you write, that's probably your best bet. I don't know that that's ever worked for anybody in publishing, but it sounded like a cogent answer. So what are your cogent answers that you give at shows like this when people come and ask you those questions? Yeah. You're getting it by now.
Oh, yeah, thanks. You know, it depends, because for an artist, it's very easy. Like, they can just show me their work. It takes 2 seconds, and in a second, I'll know if it's good or not. If a writer is not a paragraph, I'm going to read one caption, I go, you're a genius, you're reading comics. You're the next Alan Moore. What then happens is just like what Ray said, is like produce your own stuff, and that's it. Get it seen, get people talking about it, get other artists interested in what you as a writer are working on, so they want to draw your stories, and that slowly gets the attention of an editor, because we'll start hearing it's like, oh, what are they talking about? This guy who's done this bit of work, and to me, that's kind of the entryway. Other people have to start talking about you in other places, and then it attracts my attention.
You guys have this magic box called a computer, and the fascinating thing about the internet that we didn't really have when I was breaking in is that basically you can have, you know, potentially millions of people look at your work. You know, I usually tell young artists that, you know, get a blog. You know, any way you can get that work seen. You know, these days it's easier. You know, we used to, you know, that magical thing, the post office. Ryan, you talked about it before. We had, you know, we mailed in photocopies of submission pages, and that was essentially like, you know, sending a letter to Santa Claus, because you didn't really know if anybody saw them. Rarely, if ever, got a response. So I always say, yeah, definitely, you know, get a blog or get some kind of website going on the internet where you can display your work. And it's amazing how these days that stuff really does get around. You know, I see so much different work. You know, either a colleague will say, hey, have you seen this guy's stuff? Check this out. Or, hey, have you seen this book? You know, but the one piece of advice that I think is the most important thing for either a writer or an artist is that you have to work constantly. It can't be a sporadic kind of, oh, I really want to draw comics, I really want to write comics. Okay, you know, great, treat it like
All from one of us. And then, because if you haven't trained that muscle, you have no idea, now you can't make a deadline, and you fall apart. Well, there goes that call from me. Like, I'm not going to call it again.
Yeah, and just what Lee was saying, it takes a lot of dedication and work ethic. And I remember some of the best advice I ever got from one of my teachers in high school was he said, treat everything that you do in school, no matter if you like it or not, like as if you're going to be judged by your boss whether you're going to be fired or you're going to get another day to work. And I kind of did that no matter if it was math, which I hated, or whether it was English or whatever. If you're in high school now, treat it seriously and work very, very hard on those things. You will build up a work ethic that you need if you're going to take on a job like this, where you have to be very dedicated. You have to, there's no sleeping in. You have a deadline to meet. You don't have a boss breathing right in your room down your neck. You have to have that dedication to go into your office, sit down, pull out a blank piece of paper, and start working on what you need to get done for that day, and then finish it within that day, so that tomorrow you can do the same thing again. So, dedication to your craft, showing things around to different people, getting as much critique, but living it. And personally myself, I spent 2 years working on a portfolio before I even met Dave Finch, and I didn't have a job for 6 months while I was engaged and trying to, find money somehow, and then finally got a job, so, and then even after that, it was a struggle to try and get my work out there and get more and more jobs. So it takes a lot of dedication and yeah.
I actually inherited my advice. When I was 15 years old, I went to a signing and I met Harlan Ellison. He said maybe the cruelest and the truest thing that anyone has ever said to me as far as a career in writing goes. I told him I wanted to be a writer one day, and he said, "Have you got a story for me to read right now?" And I looked down and I said, "No, I don't have anything on me." And he said, "Let me tell you something that I tell everyone who says they want to be a writer. The difference between a writer and a loser is finished work. If you don't have a story for me to read right now, you're not a writer, and I don't want to hear you tell me you want to be a writer. Because if you wanted to be one that badly, you would have written something for me to read by now." It's I'm way too nice, but I still say that because it's rung in my head, and it did ring in my head for like a decade. If you think to yourself, "I want to be a writer," and you think it hard enough that you want to go up to other people and say, "I'd like to be a writer someday," finish a story. Because if you haven't finished a story that they can read the moment you tell them that you want to be a writer, then you're not a writer, and they can't judge you based on your ability to write. You're just a guy or a girl who says that they want to write someday. And I mean, I also want to have a pony in a mansion, but...
Don't forget the whiskey.
And the whiskey and
the veranda. I don't know if I'm going to say anything much different from these guys. I mean, really, if you want to break into the business, you need discipline. You need to be able to work alone in a room with no one. I talk to a lot of people on the phone, and part of the job of being an editor is sometimes you're almost like a therapist. Some guys don't talk to people during the day. They're typing, they're working, they're drawing, they're inking, they're coloring. They're just isolated in their own little world. They don't act in a studio or anything like that. They're in their homes. So you need to be able to work alone and have the discipline to be able to do that. No internet, no television, no distractions. Doing comics, it's work. I mean, it looks like fun. It is fun, but it's work. And from building off of what Eddie said, I mean, we want people who work and work on a deadline, because ultimately we need to get books out no matter who's going to draw them. We prefer them to be good when we put them out. So we want good people in position to make us look good, because we want to put out good books. So I mean, if you want to draw comics, write comics, you have to judge yourself based on what we're currently producing at DC Comics. Right now, if you're an artist, look at your work. How does it compare to the books that we publish? Because right now, guys like Francis, Lee, and Jason, I mean, they're your competition. They're the guys you got to beat. Not that you want to beat them, but if you understand what I'm saying, I mean, they have the work. Guys of that caliber will get the work. And the caliber of the work that you produce needs to be of that caliber. So there's nothing I can really say other than have discipline and work. I mean, make the work look like it's of a professional nature.
Just a little addendum to that is also develop your own style, because we have a lead, everybody else here. we don't want a second version of them. We want something unique, something cool that we haven't seen. That's what's going to make you stand out amongst everybody else.
I mean, I think the thing that basically everybody said is that you have to have drive. You know, the thing about this industry is that I'm going to be flat out honest and say I'm of the opinion that this is the easiest time to break in. You know, when I was trying to break into something, really, I didn't have the internet. I don't remember if it existed or I just couldn't afford a computer. I just know I didn't have it. And you know, in order to figure out how to break in, you know, I would read all these interviews with artists and stuff like that. And I realized the key difference between then and now is back then, if I wanted an answer to something, I had to go look for it. And I think now it's very easy to go on Twitter and say, hey, you have any tips on breaking in? Hey, what pencil do you use? And when I was a kid, I couldn't ask those questions. And I realized those questions didn't matter back then either. It didn't matter what pencil I used, it didn't matter what paper I used. What mattered was the story behind these creators and what they did to break in, which was the commonality of all of them is they had the determination to. You know, I'm of the opinion that if you were really serious about breaking in, you'd probably know the answer to all of those other things because you would have done the research already. You know, I think that's the difference between, and I think that's what makes it a little bit tough. I think you know, sometimes the easier it is to access something, the less those muscles become, you know, they almost atrophy. You know, it's almost like your killer instinct goes away because it's all of those questions are very easily asked, and sometimes in order to properly learn, you don't ask the question, you figure out the answer. You know, and I think, like everybody said, the opportunities that you have may seem lucky. You know, I think you could look at everybody here and say that we're really lucky to have our jobs, but the thing is that there's no such thing as luck in this industry. It's through your hard work and through your work ethic. You need to be prepared. You know, luck is just preparation meeting opportunity. You know, you need to be ready when that opportunity comes, and because sometimes, like you said, it might just knock once, and if you haven't been doing the work and you're not ready, I'm sorry, you missed your chance. You know, so as an artist or as a writer, you always have to be doing the work because you don't know when that opportunity is going to come. Because when that opportunity comes, you have to be ready. You know?
Well, as Francis pointed out an answer or so ago, sometimes things in life have a way of working themselves out. And as if to prove that, we got into the room late, and we've run over late by a sufficient amount of time to make up for that. I don't know about you guys, I found this last hour extremely enlightening and fascinating, and I really appreciate everybody up here for coming up and participating in what turned into our wonderful group therapy session with an audience. But I think that's what made it so valuable. And so, thanks everybody. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your show. See you next year.
Alright, well, that is it for the DC Breaking Into Comics panel, as well as the entirety of our FanExpo Canada 2013 coverage. We very much hope that you guys enjoyed coming on this ride with us and going inside of all of FanExpo Canada 2013. Should you have any questions or comments about the coverage, or perhaps even suggestions about coverage next year, then please don't hesitate to leave comments below. For more information on FanExpo Canada and FanExpo Canada Sports, then please make sure to check out the links that we've left you guys in the description. Moreover, if you would like to find the Canadian Nerd Show outside of the YouTube sphere, then you can definitely do that by finding us right there on Twitter or right there on Facebook. And we'd also like to strongly encourage you guys to comment, like, subscribe, and even share this video with all of your friends. It's FanExpo 2013. I mean, they're gonna love it. You and I both know this. However, until the next episode of the Canadian Nerd Show, in which we take you guys inside Superpower Collectibles, peace, take care, à la prochaine, mes amis. If you made it through that video, you may as well check out our sponsors too.